Hey guys, what is up? This is Nephis here, and it's time to Nephis and chill. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys a very powerful Templar tank build for PvE 4-man dungeons. So you can use this for DLC dungeons, you can use this for whatever normal or veteran dungeons you want to do. Now, a lot of people are pretty disappointed with how Templar tanks turn out in comparison to Dragon Knight tanks or Necromancer tanks. But actually, honestly, this patch, I think I might play a lot more Templar tank than Dragon Knight tank after experimenting around with a few builds. And it took me about 2 or so days, almost 3 days, to figure out a build that would work and still be fun. Now, obviously, in the same vein as my other build videos I've been doing for Scalebreaker, except the build for Veteran Black Rose Prison for my Warden Healer and my Dragon Knight tank. I've wanted to experiment and try out really fun builds that a lot of people also have access to. That's a pretty important thing in ESO, that some sets you can definitely take a long time in getting. Lots of sets you have to grind down, or lots of sets that are too expensive. So I wanted to try to get a build that's not inaccessible to even like less experienced players. So this build will also accomplish that. Now, I do know that there are, best in slot items such as Alkosh, Eben, Yonokrin, whatever, right? And obviously there's place and time for that, but in this build it's just going to be more about having fun and seeing the results. And I actually am going to give a special shout out to one of my YouTube commentators, who asked me very nicely in the comments section on a different video. Sylvia Kurosama. Dear Nephis, I know that the Templar tank is not abyss in this patch, or, well, never has been lately, but since you have a taste for unusual builds, that part, it's like, not really unusual builds, but experimental builds, okay? I'd like you to put up a Paladin tank build, and at first I was like, Paladin tank build? The fuck does that mean? Something really Dungeons and Dragon-like, and I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? Old-fashioned RPG games. It would be really appreciated because I cannot find any build on YouTube, and the few that I found are far too old and don't satisfy me. Thanks a lot for your work either way, if you do the build or not. Well, Sylvia Kurosama, this is the build for you and many others who want to try out Templar tanking, because Templar tanking actually definitely has a lot of potential, even in trials. But it's not very used often because, I mean, I've used Templar tank in the past. I actually have a Templar tank off-tank build for Asylum Sanatorium Harbor, but that was quite a while ago, so I understand that not a lot of people have kept up with making builds for classes that are underused. So this is going to be a very fun build for you, and hopefully you enjoy it. Going back to this concept of Paladin, now, I'm not really too familiar with, I mean, I've dabbled in Dungeons and Dragons and so on, but I'm not really too familiar with the other fantasy aspects of Paladin. I get the general gist that, they're holy knights, heavy armor, maces, they heal teammates like clerics. But historically speaking, Paladins, they were knights of a sort, and knights are assholes. So some aspects of this build I kind of built around that concept of being an asshole. You'll see. So let's start. Sorry for the rambling, but I just want to give a special shout out to this person. So I'm going to go over to stats first, and the stats are actually going to be very interesting here. We're going to be an orc, and this will be explained later on. Why not Imperial? Why not a Nord? Why not a Brethren or whatever? And there's a very particular reason for this, as you'll see. And of course, we are a Templar. This is a Templar PvE tank build after all. Now, the attribute points is up for discussion. I would actually recommend about 25 to 30 points into Magicka. Going into a DLC dungeon the other day with a jankier version of this build, I am going to say anywhere between 25 to 34 points of stamina. This is really dependent on how experienced you are as a tank as well, or if you like blocking too much or stuff like that. For trash, your stamina pool, whether it's 18 to 24,000 max stamina, will not be an issue. This is more for more intensive boss fights with more intensive mechanics. So I would say you could definitely safely take about 20 points away from stamina and put it into 20 points into health if you are feeling that you know, almost 35,000 health is not enough. And for some people, it may seem a little low, but at the same time, it's fine for pretty much almost every content, every 4-man dungeon. And magic recovery is pretty low, health recovery is pretty low, stamina recovery is pretty low. None of this is kind of relevant due to the nature of the build. And our spell damage is going to be pretty high, 2800 spell damage, and weapon damage is going to be the exact same equivalent. That's a hint. Weapon crit's low, spell crit's low. Physical resistances, spell resistance is pretty great, actually. Buffed with Major War, Major Resolve, it's almost cap on spell resistance, and close to cap as well on physical resistance. These resistances are more than fine. It's you're really tanky for 4-man content. This is pretty much the same, about the same resistance that I would take a tank to for trials. So you'll be fine in terms of resistances for 4-man content. And a lot of people forget that Templars are sort of like Dragon Knights in the fact that they do get an innate like spell resistance buff, like 2640. It also gives us a weapon damage boost, so that's pretty nice. So those are the stats, and the Wonder Stone is going to be the warrior. You're going to be like, oh, the warrior, what the hell? And why not the lore, why not the atro? That's typical, right? Well, not for this build. So increase all primary stats. We're still going to actually have tri-stat food. Tri-stat food is really hard to beat. I mean, I've tried like Red Hrothgar or stuff like that, but the playstyle of the build and the specs of the build not very suited for certain other foods. But yeah, the tri-stat food is going to definitely be a staple, and I would highly recommend using Bewitched Sugar Skulls when it comes out. And that's pretty much it for the stats. And now these stats actually can go up to almost 4,400 weapon damage and spell damage on the front bar, and on the back bar slightly lower at about 4,100, 4,000 weapon and spell damage, and I'll explain why. The 2-piece monster set you want to have for the most part is going to be Swarm Mothers for most 4-man content. There's a skill you could use like Silver Leash, and now obviously it's a costly skill in terms of stamina, even with the Intimidating Presence passive. This is more for priority ads, but if you want to take your time or whatever, or stack the ranged ads on the melee ads, or with line of sight, or stack the melee ads on the ranged ads, there are techniques to sort of circumvent leashing. But otherwise, Swarm Mothers in addition to leashing is going to be of great help. Now there are other monster sets to consider for certain instances or certain fights. Sentinel is going to be a pretty huge one, especially for yourself and your group if they're stamina DPS. Stonekeeper is definitely a great sustain set, and it also gives us a pretty good survivability as well, because it also gives us health back, not just stamina and magicka once the proc conditions are met. And I actually do recommend using this for certain damage heavy boss fights for sure. Symphony, this is more for like if you're fine without any of this. This is more of a luxury set, especially for your DPS. It is definitely a great sustain set, very powerful, but it is definitely on the back burner here. Engine's Guardian is also another great answer to any sustain issues you might run into. Although for Templar, I've definitely am preferring Stonekeeper's set more. And Durvakun is definitely going to be a very interesting set to use for very ad-heavy dungeons like Lair Marsalok. So this is something to consider as well. Otherwise, Swarm Mothers, Stonekeeper, definitely top 2 sets if I had to pick, you know, the number 1 and number 2 sets I run most of the time. The 5-piece on the body is going to be Pelinal's Aptitude. Now a lot of people treat this set as sort of like a weird hybrid build, and it does its job pretty well. In this case, the 2-piece bonus we get is max health. I mean, free max health for a tank. Why not? Stam recovery, magic recovery. It's okay, I guess. Not so great since we're not stacking so much into either one. And the 5th-piece bonus is your spell and weapon damage both become the highest of the 2 values, and that's why you saw that my spell damage and my weapon damage is equivalent, exactly the same. My weapon damage is of course higher, and this has brought my spell damage up to my weapon damage. My secondary 5-piece bonus is Fury on the Sword and Board bar. And you'll be like, what, Nephis, that's a PvP set. It was, until they changed the set for Scalebreaker, update 23. So it gives us more health, it gives us more stam, it gives us another 4-piece bonus of weapon damage. Pretty great in comparison to Paladin's. 3-piece and 4-piece bonus does not really impress me, but we mostly have it for the 5th-piece bonus. So the 5th-piece bonus of Fury for update 23 is when you take damage. That's the key phrase here. Before Scalebreaker, Fury's condition could only be procced by when you take critical damage. That's why it was a PvP set. Lots of Dragon Knights used it. And when you take damage now, this is for PvE or PvP. Doesn't matter if you're in Cyrodiil, it doesn't matter if you're in a dungeon or a delve or whatever. Your weapon damage is increased by 30 for 5 seconds, stacking up to 20 times. So you essentially get 600 weapon damage. And once it reaches 600 weapon damage, the duration of Fury is doubled to 10 seconds. So you get 600 weapon damage once it reaches max for 10 seconds. But it can no longer be refreshed. So you only have 600 weapon damage for about 10 seconds, and you have to restack the weapon damage. And this is perfectly fine, because as a Templar tank in most PvE dungeons, your strength will really come out in trash fights. And trash fights seldom last too long unless you're in like a pug group or in a very inexperienced group that has very low damage. Even then though, like Fury is very, very reliable this patch. I know a lot of PvPers are using it still, going into Scalebreaker. So this is a pretty good set. So combining Fury with Paladins, this was a concept I was very curious about, and it's outstanding actually how well it works. And on the back bar, it's going to be the Maelstrom's Resto Staff with an infused trait and the Crusher enchantment. We still want to debuff the bosses and so on. And how do you proc the Crusher enchantment if you don't have Lightning Wall from Destro or whatever? You just light attack. And, you know, Resto Staff, heavy attack, and light attacks are pretty smooth. And you just light attack. That's pretty much it. Poor rat. Traits wise, I am going to go over it real quick. We want 1 infused on the head, 1 infused on the chest, 1 infused on the pants. And this is to kind of help our health pool a bit if you are going to invest a bit more into stamina, if you're having stamina issues, which for the most part you shouldn't for most dungeons. But if you are having stamina issues, we are going to put a bit more into stamina, and then we're going to put health enchantments on these infused body pieces. And it's going to give us quite a bit more health. And on the smaller pieces, instead of the traditional 4-piece sturdy and 3-piece infused, so that we have 4 pieces divines, I did consider going all 7 divines, but I tried it and it wasn't too great. Again, you still want to focus on survivability as a tank, and this build pretty much accomplishes utility, survivability, and enjoying the game. Traits wise on the jewelry, you're gonna have healthy. I kept it healthy. I don't really like transmuting on live. So just to show you guys, you don't have to really transmute much if you don't have transmute stones, or if you don't PvP a lot. So healthy will actually work out pretty well here, because it's gonna help our maximum health pool. And we want weapon damage on all pieces of jewelry. You don't need block cost reduction glyphs. Your CP and the 4-piece of sturdy will pretty much take care of your block cost reduction. And that's pretty much it for that. And on the one-hander, you're gonna have infused, and this will boost your, like, the idea of this is to pretty much ramp up our weapon damage, to pretty much do a loophole on our spell damage as a paladin type build, right? I don't know if you guys kind of understand, but basically, like, as a healer, right, what do you need to have? You need to have max magicka, you need to have spell damage, you need to have a light armor, but we're gonna pretty much sort of ignore all that and use the loophole that is Paladins to boost our spell damage without investing much into spell damage glyphs or max magicka, or buy stat for more max magicka, whatever, right? And this is how we do it. We just raise our weapon damage, and it's far easier to raise the weapon damage than it is to raise the spell damage, especially on the tank wearing heavy armor, right? You gotta remember that we're wearing heavy armor still, 5-piece heavy, 1 light, 1 medium for the Undaunted passive of Undaunted Metal, gives us 6% more max resources. Very important to keep in mind. And on the shield, We're gonna have one infused trait. You'll be asking why not divines to boost our weapon damage. It's because once we switch to the back bar, we're not gonna have the 4 and 5 piece bonuses of fury. So your weapon damage will definitely lower when you go back to your back bar to heal yourself and so forth. So that's why we don't really have to concern ourselves with, going beyond the 3 or 4 divine pieces on the body. That's pretty much it. So I want more max health, since we're putting a lot of points into stamina in this case, and then that's going to give us more health. And I mentioned this earlier, so you want infused trait, pressure enchant, you're still debuffing the boss. And that's it. For the skill setup, it's pretty interesting actually. There's a couple flex slots. For trash or boss fights, you can have luminous shards, and luminous shards will actually proc spear wall, and that's minor protection for 6 seconds. Obviously you're not going to be throwing a spear every 6 seconds, which leads us to Ransack. While Templars do have this innate minor protection passive that is proc on the condition, there's going to be a lot of times where you won't be using luminous shard in certain boss fights, or possibly not being able to throw your DPS a shard. The idea of giving utility to your group is perfectly well and good, but there are times where realistically in a fight you won't be able to always give a shard as a tank. And that's why we kind of have Ransack, to give us a more constant source of minor protection. This is kind of preference, so if you guys think, well, for the content I run, I want to run Pierce Armor, or if I'm running with 3 magic DPS, I can switch to Pierce Armor. That's perfectly fine. This is preference. And you can have Echoing Vigor. Echoing Vigor, the heal from it is pretty huge, especially considering you're in 5-piece heavy armor. Obviously this can be switched out for Power to Light. Power to Light is a very good Templar Devo skill to bring to the table for single target boss fights. Minor Fracture, Minor Breach, that's pretty great. So that's another consideration for the most part. For survivability or whatever, you can definitely put Echoing Vigor. Power to Light is also a luxury depending on what your situation is. Heroic Slash is a very great buff as well, and a debuff. Minor Maim, especially single target on the boss, 15% less damage done. That will pretty much save a no death achievement at times. Some bosses will not one-shot DPS if you minor maim them. There are certain mechanics where they do, and a lot of people are confused as to why they one-shot sometimes and why they don't one-shot sometimes. Probably your tank did not Heroic Slash or minor maim the bosses. And also you get Minor Heroism, granting you 1 ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 12 seconds. Repentance, this is a huge reason. It's such a powerful healing skill for you. Like, you get stamina back for every corpse, and you heal for, like, it's per corpse. 3,420 health and restoring 3,000 stamina to you for each corpse. Trash fights will be glorious for you. Like, you'll pretty much have perfect sustain. You'll be topped off with other heals like Echoing Vigor and other healing on it for your back bar going. Repentance, even for like heavy boss fights, this will compensate for your lack of stamina recovery or magic recovery or whatever. It's a very strong skill to have, and I highly recommend you run it on either your front bar or your back bar. Now, Solar Prison, so this is also a flex slot in terms of what ultimates you can use. You can use Horn. You can use Solar Prison, you can use Shield Discipline if you're having trouble sustaining, or if if you want to play safe. Remembrance maybe for some trash pulls. It's kind of a meme, but it actually is an interesting skill. You get major protection for 10 seconds, and you also heal the rest of the group. The downside to using this is that it's 4-second channel times. In 4 seconds a lot can happen. Maybe you lose a taunt or something, right? So that's something to consider. Other skills to consider on the front bar is definitely defensive stance. Living Dark is also an interesting skill you could utilize in trash pulls. It actually is an interesting utility skill for yourself. Radiant Ward is also an Adrix Spear ability. So in the event that you don't want to, give your DPS a shard or whatever, you can definitely use Radiant Ward. You can also do an orb as your synergy instead of shard, because multiple people can now synergize with 1 orb. So it's really fun to play around with what skills you want to do. And Radiant Ward is also going to be, I don't think it's necessary for most trash, but it is pretty interesting how it scales. And also, it's a pretty fun skill to use at times. So these are all considerations for the front bar. Sorry for the rambling. And on the back bar, we're gonna have channeled focus, or rather restoring focus, and this is gonna give us stamina back while we're blocking. This is very key. No other, like, tanks a long time ago, we could have stamina recovery while we blocked. You can't get stamina back while you block. This actually gives us stamina back while you block and while you're standing in it. As it says, you also recover 240 stamina every 1 second. That's pretty great considering that you'll probably be blocking. It's also a source of major war, major resolve. This is why I don't recommend using Shudan, because this is such an essential class skill in your kit that gives you stamina recovery back every second. And it gives you major war, major resolve, right? So it's like a win-win. Depending on, I don't think you would need channel focus. I think restoring focus would probably be the clear winner with this build. Inner rage is gonna be your standard, obviously standard range taunt, the only range taunt, since you're not using a frost staff, and it's pretty cheap now. So yeah, with our pool of max health, 19.3 thousand max health, that's almost the same as my DK tank build for most dungeons. It's gonna be great for your sustain, depending on the trash or the boss fight. Combat prayer. Now, combat prayer is gonna be an AoE burst heal for yourself and your group, and this does scale off of your spell damage and your max magicka, and our spell damage is gonna be insane because our weapon damage is gonna be insane. So this is definitely gonna be a great utility and heal skill, because it gives minor berserk, minor resolve, and minor ward to everyone you hit it with, including yourself. So you get more mitigation for physical and spell resistance, and you give minor berserk to your DPS. And nowadays most people run 3 DPS anyway, so you are basically essentially fulfilling this concept of a holy paladin. You are wearing heavy armor, you're tanking the ads and the bosses, and you're giving healing and holy magic basically to your group. And cleansing ritual is also going to be a skill for sure. This is going to be a very strong heal over time, plus a utility purge for yourself. It also offers a synergy to purge negative status effects for your group. Whether you want to use Ritual Retribution or Extended Ritual, I think I would probably say go with Extended Ritual. It is going to be less of a magic drain. It is a pretty expensive skill, and it's like a 24-second duration. So it should last pretty much an entire trash fight or a significant portion of a boss fight. And the synergy, the cooldown is every 20 seconds. So after you synergize it, or after a DPS synergizes, I mean, they're gonna get the synergy again right before it expires, until 24 seconds. And then radiating regeneration, this is it. This is like so strong. The highest tooltip I've seen for it so far is about 19.3k. For those of you who don't know, with Bystat food, Thief Stone or Mage Munda Stone, whatever, or Pendant's Munda Stone, and 3 spell damage glyphs, most healers, their tooltips are around 21 to 23,000 over 10 seconds. And it's pretty insane unbuffed that it says 14.7k. I've seen on this build, after, you know, proccing everything, after proccing 226 weapon damage, after Fury stacking up to 600 weapon damage, and so forth, Radiant Regeneration is like on this build is 2,000 healing done away from a healer. That's insane. It's mind-boggling. And this is going to be your main heal for the most part. It's a great heal over time for both yourself and for your DPS, in case they spread out or break loose from the group. Light's Champion is going to be our ultimate on the back bar, and it's a very, very strong healing skill as well. And it's also Provider Major Force. So how this works actually is it can heal multiple people. It kind of jumps from person to person depending on who's the lowest for 5 seconds. So this is definitely going to be an oh shit button. This is going to be our kind of mini version of a Magma Shell or Bone Goliath ultimate. It's a very strong skill for yourself and for anyone who is low. I highly do recommend running it. So that's it pretty much for the bar setup. And now I'm gonna go into why before we go into CP, I want to go into why we're an orc. And obviously, we get more stamina, which is nice, and we get more max health, which is again nice. And then we do also get that secondary passive of when you deal damage with a weapon ability, like Ransack or whatever, you heal. This is like the old red diamond passive for Imperial, sort of. And Swift Warrior, now we get a 12% cost reduction to sprint. And for really long dungeons, like Lair of Mars, Lug, or Vaults of Madness, this is pretty handy. And we get an increase in movement speed bonus of sprint by 10%, again, pretty handy. But the biggest thing about Swift Warrior is the innate weapon damage bonuses, or bonus that orcs get. And this is going to play into how our weapon damage is scaling with these 3 weapon damage glyphs, Fury, the weapon damage enchantment, and this is all going to contribute to almost a 4,400 weapon damage boost, which in turn makes the spell damage 4,400 as well. So that is the point of this build, and it works pretty great. Survivability is pretty great. I do highly recommend you guys try it out. And that's pretty much it. So let's get into CP. So for most dungeons, you can do 81 Ironclad. It's pretty standard. 49 Hardy, 49 Elemental Defender. Most dungeons have a mix of damage, physical and spell-based damage. 56 thick skin, 20.15% damage over time effects reduced. 19 quick recovery. The 5% healing received is pretty nice for our constant healing done as we move through a dungeon. We got 16 heavy armor focus, 56 warlord, 35 sprinter, 37 bashing focus. The nice thing about this build is you can sort of just take a step back and not spec anything into Arcanus, because magic recovery is kind of redundant with this build, because remember, we do have a Maelstrom restoration staff. When you critically heal with regeneration, even on a tank or a very low crit build, used to always proc all the time on my healers before Scalebreaker, before we switched to the Deep Stone for the most part. You restore 800 magicka. This effect can occur once every 4 seconds. That's actually a pretty decent amount of regen. So this is a part of the reason why we're also using Radiant Regeneration for the magicka back. Your magicka shouldn't really dip too much, honestly, as long as you manage your resources. But yeah, that's a pretty interesting way to kind of step back from the traditional, I'll put 64, 56 into Arcanus. But instead we actually have a lot of points to play around with here. So we're going to have 35 Sprinter. I mean, this can be subject to whatever you're experiencing. You could put like a complete 100 in the Shadow Ward if you want, or more into Tenacity if you feel like you need to heavy attack sometimes. 56 Tumbling, sustain is pretty great in terms of like dodge rolling mechanics so far. Blue Tree, 75 Blessed, 75 Elfborn, and of course this is going to affect your healing done on the group, and nothing in the Atronach tree. In the Ritual tree we have 100 precise strikes and 20 damage. Now why 100 precise strikes? Because it affects the healing done by Vigor. That's why we have it, and we also want the Last Stand perk, which is very helpful regardless of whether you're Dragon Knight or not. When you fall below 20% health, you gain Major Heroism, granting 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 8 seconds. This effect occurs once every 20 seconds. And that is pretty much it for CP, skills, food, everything. Hopefully you guys will enjoy this build as I have, and again, shout out to Sylvia Kuro-sama for requesting it very politely. And I'll see you guys next time. I hope you enjoyed Nephis and chilling with me. Stay safe and have fun.